Now this, on the other hand, is Agent Romanoff's assessment of you.
Textbook narcissism.
Black Widow. Highly skilled in both physical combat and deception, master of many martial arts, fluent in several languages, one of the most intelligent agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., future Avenger, and... well, she used to be smart anyway. Disney seems to be destroying their characters left and right these days. Although I've never really been a Black Widow fan, I always believed that she was, at least at one point, a competent character. However, even when Black Widow was considered competent, this line has always troubled me.
Now this, on the other hand, is Agent Romanoff's assessment of you.
Textbook narcissism.
Many people have used this clip as evidence that Tony Stark does indeed have NPD, narcissistic personality disorder. For all intents and purposes, I'm going to assume that Natasha was serious when she said that Tony had textbook narcissism. I'm going to assume she did not write this to be some sort of joke, which means that we are also going to assume that Nick Fury believes it as well. I mean, he looks pretty serious in this scene.
Textbook narcissism. Agreed?
Tony says that he agrees with that assessment, but I'm inclined to believe that this was a joke on his part and not a serious acknowledgement. We can find other clips of Tony acknowledging his faults for the sake of a joke.
Pepper, I've been called many things. Nostalgic is not one of them.
Cheap trick and a cheesy one-liner.
Sweetheart, that could be the name of my autobiography. We're mad scientists. We're monsters, buddy. You've got to own it. Will you keep that a little quiet? Didn't bring one for the whole team.
That being said, I am of the opinion that Tony Stark does not have NPD. I will base my examination upon his appearances in the MCU from his first movie up to Endgame. I would also like to make it clear that I will not be mentioning any subtypes of NPD. The only reason I will not be mentioning the subtypes of NPD are because it is currently not recognized by the DSM-5. With all that said, let's begin. So what is NPD? This is the official definition of NPD according to the DSM-4 and DSM-5. The essential feature of narcissistic personality disorder is a pervasive pattern of grandiosity in fantasy or behavior, need for admiration, and lack of empathy that begins by early adulthood and is present in a variety of contexts. The key here is the word pattern. That has to be made clear from the start. NPD, like most personality disorders, are not diagnosed based off of a singular circumstance. We are looking for a noticeable pattern of behavior. If a healthcare professional considered diagnosing someone with NPD, that person would need to have at least 5 out of the 9 criterion to qualify. Let's go back to the first clip I showed you.
Now this, on the other hand, is Agent Romanoff's assessment of you.
Textbook narcissism.
In this clip, Natasha describes Tony's narcissism as textbook narcissism. Textbook. She could only be referring to the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. She couldn't have possibly used the DSM-5 because Iron Man 2, where this clip was taken from, came out in 2010, and the DSM-5 wasn't released until 2013. However, the DSM-4 was published in 1994, and the diagnosis for NPD is identical to the current diagnosis. The DSM-4 and the DSM-5 state that many highly successful individuals display personality traits that might be considered narcissistic. Only when these traits are inflexible, maladaptive, and persisting, and cause significant functional impairment or subjective distress do they constitute narcissistic personality disorder. It's very important that we understand this if we are going to analyze Tony properly. Tony Stark may be based upon real men who existed, but there are very few men in the real world like him. Can you think of anyone who comes close to his level of intelligence, charisma, fame, and wealth? The correct answer should be no. Because canonically, Tony Stark is responsible for creating time travel, as well as many other things that should not be possible. Let's just look at Tony Stark's resume.
At age 4, he built his first circuit board. At age 6, his first engine. And at 17, he graduated summa cum laude from MIT.
Men like him simply do not exist in real life because they are unbelievably rare. So why is this important to bring up? That's a good question. In real life, especially in first world countries, celebrities usually share many of the same characteristics as well as lifestyles. They are usually extroverted, entrepreneurial, and wealthy. I'm sure that there are more examples I could give, but you get the point. Celebrities, no matter what sphere they belong to, have an image to keep up because often their paycheck depends upon it. Politicians, actors, athletes, all want to be portrayed as charismatic, prosperous, and generous, and Tony Stark is no exception. In other words, because a celebrity wants to be seen in a positive light, that does not mean that that alone makes them narcissistic. What makes someone narcissistic is a recognizable pattern of behaviors, thoughts, and feelings, and that is the only way that we're going to determine any diagnosis accurately. In this scene, Tony is giving a speech at the Stark Expo, his expo. The world is aware that he is Iron Man and he is essentially performing for the crowd. Any host worth his or her salt in this scenario would be trying to get the audience excited. I will not look at a singular scene like this, remove the context from it, and deduce that this confirms Tony Stark has a need for admiration. Based off the context, this scene alone does not prove that. Now that we actually understand what NPD is, let's go over Criterion 1 with the help of Pepper Potts.
The essential feature of narcissistic personality disorder is a pervasive pattern of grandiosity, need for admiration, and lack of empathy that begins by early adulthood and is present in a variety of contexts. Individuals with this disorder have a grandiose sense of self-importance. Criterion 1.
Does Tony Stark have a grandiose sense of self-importance? Well, I'm certain it would be tempting to actually say yes to this, given what we see at first. But the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual is clear, and this is how they define a grandiose sense of self-importance. Exaggerates achievements and talents, expects to be recognized as superior without commensurate achievements. And that is not an accurate description of Tony Stark. I am actually going to go into this in greater detail when we talk about Criterion 2, but for now, I will say that Criterion 1 does not apply to Tony Stark. Let's move on to Criterion 2.
They routinely overestimate their abilities and inflate their accomplishments, often appearing boastful and pretentious. They may blithely assume that others attribute the same value to their efforts and may be surprised when the praise they expect and feel they deserve is not forthcoming. Often implicit in the inflated judgments of their own accomplishments is an underestimation, devaluation of the contributions of others. They are often preoccupied with fantasies of unlimited success, power, brilliance, beauty, or ideal love. Criterion 2.
First of all, I would like for you all to notice how frequently the word often appears. 3 times, and the word routinely appears once. They are making it very clear that this is a pattern. The only sentence that does not contain those words is here. They may blithely assume that others attribute the same value to their efforts and may be surprised when the praise they expect and feel they deserve is not forthcoming. The word may is used twice to emphasize the infrequent nature of this behavior. Let's examine the frequent behavior first and see if any of it applies to Tony Stark. Does he routinely overestimate his abilities and inflate his accomplishments, often appearing boastful and pretentious? I could certainly show you several clips of Tony boasting about his accomplishments and ignore the context, but remember, we are looking for something specific here, not just boasting. Suppose we take this clip here. This is one of Tony's most infamous clips.
Big man in a suit of armor. Take that off. What are you?
Genius, billionaire, playboy, philanthropist.
Is this boastful? Yes. But is this an overestimation of himself? Is he inflating his accomplishments? No, not at all. And look at that, even Natasha, the same Natasha who diagnosed Tony Stark with textbook narcissism, has nothing to add. Calling himself a genius is not an overestimation. It's a fact. He is, quite literally, a genius.
Tony Stark was able to build this in a cave with a box of scraps.
At age 4, he built his first circuit board. At age 6, his first engine. And at age 17, he graduated summa cum laude from MIT. Incidentally, in real life, MIT does not honor its students with Latin achievements, but in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, they do, apparently. He is also not lying or exaggerating when he describes himself as a billionaire, playboy, and a philanthropist. We can find several clips of this pretty quickly.
Lab's all set up, boss.
Oh, actually, he's the boss. I just pay for everything and design everything and make everyone look cooler.
How quickly can we buy this building?
Is it true you went 12 for 12 with last year's maximum cover models?
That is an excellent question. Yes and no. March and I had a scheduling conflict, but fortunately the Christmas cover was twins. As of this moment, every student has been made an equal recipient of the inaugural September Foundation grant. All of your projects have just been approved and funded.
He was already famous when he was just Tony Stark, but when he revealed that he was Iron Man, he became more than just a philanthropist celebrated for his successes in business. He became a superhero in the eyes of the public, and to many, something akin to a symbol. Does he expect to be recognized as superior without commensurate achievements? No. He expects to be recognized because in the MCU, he is quite literally an icon. If he is boastful or pretentious, it is because he knows that he has earned his successes and not because he has inflated his accomplishments. Let's look at another clip.
Anybody remember when I carried a nuke through a wormhole?
No, it's never come up.
Save
No,
New York?
Never heard that.
Recall that?
This is another example of what I'm talking about. This is a boastful statement, but not a lie, and not delusional. It is a true statement. He's not inflating the circumstances, and he is simultaneously making light of what happened. I don't believe that this portion of Criterion 2 applies to Tony. Now, let's take a look at the second most frequent behavior from the second criterion. Often implicit in the inflated judgments of their own accomplishments is an underestimation, devaluation of the contributions of others. For this to apply to Tony, not only would there have to be evidence of him frequently inflating the judgments of his accomplishments, he would also have to frequently underestimate or devalue the contributions of others. Not only would those behaviors have to be caught simultaneously, but the latter would have to be implicit. Can we find an example of that? In this example, Tony makes an interesting statement after Agent Hill questions him.
When did you become an expert in thermonuclear astrophysics?
Last night. The packet. Selvig's notes. The extraction theory papers. Am I the only one who did the reading?
This clip could be considered an example of Tony Stark inflating an accomplishment by suggesting that he became an expert in thermonuclear astrophysics in one night. It could also be considered an example of inflating an accomplishment while simultaneously devaluing the contributions or abilities of the others in the room. But unfortunately, this clip does not fulfill the entirety of the criterion. In the first place, this combination of inflating an accomplishment while simultaneously devaluing another person is not a frequent behavior of his. In the second place, Tony proves to be correct when he describes what Loki would need the iridium for, and Tony also provides a summarized list of the materials he had to study, which does give credibility to his statement that he might be an expert in thermonuclear astrophysics. In the third place, it is also likely that the reply, last night, is meant to be a joke. I think it's safe to say that this small portion of the second criterion does not apply to Tony. Now, let's move on to the third most frequent behavior mentioned in the second criterion. They are often preoccupied with fantasies of unlimited success, power, brilliance, beauty, or ideal love. As far as I can tell, there is no evidence of Tony frequently fantasizing about these things. If I'm wrong, please let me know because I would find it very helpful. Tony is already successful, powerful, brilliant, attractive, and has his figurative pick when it comes to available women. So I cannot confirm that this sentence applies to him. Finally, let's look at the most infrequent portion of the second criterion. They may blithely assume that others attribute the same value to their efforts and may be surprised when the praise they expect and feel they deserve is not forthcoming. A good example of this specific behavior can be found in this scene.
Tony Stark not recommended?
That doesn't make any sense. How can you approve me but not approve me?
In this scene, Tony is surprised that he is not recommended and feels as though he deserved a bit more recognition for his heroic deeds, and most likely assumed that Nick attributed the same value to his efforts as himself. He shakes Fury's hand and smiles blithely. The components are there. However, I cannot agree that this portion of the criterion applies to him. Tony's expectation of Nick Fury is completely justified. He has every right to expect praise for his efforts. That's because previous to this scene, Tony had just finished saving not only the lives of everyone who attended the Stark Expo, but he also defeated Ivan Vanko and prevented further harm to be done to civilians. The context matters. Now, let's get back to the scene between Tony and Nick. Remember, the second criterion clearly states that someone who qualified for the second criterion would routinely overestimate their abilities and inflate their accomplishments, which means that that person would either have to be lying or delusional, and then they would still blithely assume that others attribute the same value to their efforts and may be surprised when the praise they expect and feel they deserve is not forthcoming. But, for the sake of argument, let's suppose that I was wrong about this particular sentence and that there were actually 2 or 3 other clips of Tony behaving in this particular way, making assumptions and acting surprised when he doesn't receive expected praise. It would still not be enough to conclude that the first criterion of NPD applied to him. It's important to keep in mind that all 4 of these sentences belong to the same criterion. And when a healthcare professional is making a judgment on whether or not a criterion is applicable, they have to make that decision based off the overall frequency of behavior and the diagnosis model. The decision cannot be made off of one instance. So, after reviewing Criterion 2, I have concluded that it does not apply to Tony Stark. But hey, I'm not a healthcare professional, so take my word with a grain of salt. In any case, thank you very much for watching part 1. What did you think of the video? Leave a comment and give your opinion on Tony Stark. This is a multiple part series, so like and subscribe so you don't miss part 2. Take care, everybody.
With a box of scraps!